Name, but I've been in the space for a little while. Today I want to talk, I'm an engineer, so I'm not going to get too technical. I'm going to save it for the questions afterwards. Hopefully that we'll give enough of a high-level overview that you can ask some questions and I can give you directions. I want you to think about these things as keywords because there's not nearly enough time in the day to tell you all the things that are possible with Bitcoin. So, I am one of those toxic Bitcoin maximalists, per se. Now, this is a name, actually, that Mr. Vitalik Buterin decided to hand out as sort of a pejorative to kind of make fun of people like me. But ultimately, I want to talk to you about how I think sound money forms a foundation for the real economic future. Seems like a lot of the conversation today kind of touches on this, but I want to dive into it in a little bit more detail. So just kind of give you some background as to how I got into this space. I started originally with Occupy Wall Street. I was sort of a Ron Paul fan very early on. Decided that, I really didn't like the direction that I saw things going. And so I started to help participate, organize Occupy Wall Street all the way back in the summer of 2011. Through that process, I learned a lot of lessons, a lot of results of what when you try to make a change and you're going up against just something so big, you really have to prepare and be aware of just the size of that challenge. I went on to work at BitPay after that. This is what really caused me to take a second look at the Bitcoin white paper. It had already come across my radar and my tech sphere, and I honestly didn't quite get it. I didn't connect the dots between the economic aspects of things and the technological aspect of things. But that whole experience for me led me to understand this thing called socio-technical systems, right? You can have technology which might address one problem that is perceived by the engineers who built it. But if it doesn't connect on the human level, then you're missing out on the whole point of the system in the first place. Technology is a tool. It exists to solve social problems, make things easier for each and every one of us. So I moved on to BitPay in 2013 once I became the crazy uncle, trying to convince everybody in my family that Bitcoin was the future. And every business I talked to, I was like, all right, well, I'm not coming back here unless you guys accept Bitcoin. So I really was a crazy uncle for a while, running around North Carolina. It was a lot of fun, but man, it was tough to really sell the argument. It hadn't quite been formulated even in my own head yet. But I got reached out to by BitPay. Some of you guys may be familiar with them. They're a payment processor, still active in the space, one of the first businesses in the space. At the time, they were very well invested in open source as the sort of rising tide lifts all boats strategy, right? This is this idea that if you invest in open source ultimately can help more and more people out rather than having different products that compete on X, Y, or Z. Why not all contribute to the same code base so that everybody can benefit from those investments that are going in? So we pushed a couple of cool projects. In fact, ChainDB, something that I don't think received enough attention at the time, was one of the first sidechain implementations. We had Impulse, which is sort of a precursor to the Lightning Network. In fact, Jeff Garzik, the gentleman who I believe was going to speak, he was actually a co-author with me on the Impulse paper, and this is just before the Lightning Network kind of came out. We also worked on something called Foxtrot, which was a peer-to-peer messaging protocol. I will say it's kind of a precursor to what I'm going to talk about at Fabric. So that was a really interesting period of time where I got to see how difficult it was to convince businesses that rather than accepting this tried, trusted, and true green paper state script, that they could accept this digital currency. It just didn't make any sense to them. So we had to formulate that argument. We did end up getting, I think, about 150,000 businesses worldwide that would accept it, but so few of them would actually hold on to the currency. And this is where I start talking about that social aspect. Is a sound money, what is a good money? A good money has a certain number of properties, right? It has, it's fungible, number one. You can't distinguish necessarily between one unit of the currency and another. It's secure, it doesn't lose value over time, right? It's something you can keep your savings in. There's all these lists of properties that a sound money has. But for whatever reason, these businesses just really trusted that greenback dollar more than they trusted thermodynamic security. So I spent, after I left BitPay, a little bit disenfranchised. I felt that they were pulling back from investing in open source, and that was really my shtick. I really like to work on technology that's open and available for everybody to see how it works. I spent that summer in 2015 thinking about this thing called Fabric. How do we, Bitcoin seems like it solves the money problem, where we no longer have, there's no longer a central point of failure which can be assaulted or taken over as a vulnerability, but rather but now how do we do something with it, right? So how do we build applications in much the same way? How do we build services? How do we build businesses on top of this system if what we have is a base layer that's very focused on being a money? I'll save I got invited to work at Blockstream, where I kind of sat on the idea for about 2 years and dealt with some really interesting political debates or attacks, depending on what you want to perceive them to be. But ultimately I said, you know what, I think it's time, and this is in 2017, I think it's time to actually show how products can be built on top of Bitcoin. So I started Fabric Labs. But let's talk about this though for a second, because this is really the feelings that I was getting, back in 2011 when I was, looking at Occupy and, starting to really reread that Bitcoin white paper. It's like, man, these trusted institutions that, we all kind of, well, a lot of us grew up kind of expecting, somebody to be there in the case as like a safety net of some sort. It's supposed to be the law enforcement, the people enforcing justice and, keeping things in order for civilization. But that's really not what we ended up with, is it? So the castle is burning, and that's really the best way that I can think about it. You have all of these widely disparate groups, some fighting each other, but a lot of it has lost the greater idea of supporting people through the social aspect of things. So I am going to talk, like I said, a little bit technically, but this is straight out of the white paper. What is Bitcoin? Why does it exist? This is literally the first sentence in the Bitcoin abstract. You'll see it's peer-to-peer, strictly peer-to-peer, without going through a financial institution is another thing that this thing says, right? Disintermediating, removing these third parties from what should be otherwise a perfectly mutual, voluntarist, peer-to-peer trade. If I'm participating in business with someone, frankly, it's nobody else's business what we're doing in our business, right? If I'm buying something from you, that's our business. So Bitcoin really strikes at that heart. It really, in the very first sentence of the white paper, it really makes a statement about what it's about. And there's a lot of other things in the white paper, but I really do think that it deserves a read. No matter how technical you are or non-technical or whatever it may be, it's short. I think it's like 8 pages. And it describes things in a really clear and concise language, far better than I think I could probably ever do. But how does Bitcoin work? All right, so I'm just going to gloss over this really quickly. I think we all kind of have a good idea about cryptographic signatures and the fact that they can prove with mathematical certainty that you've had a piece of information at a particular point in time. Bitcoin, in this case, these public keys are used. But what we can do is actually, instead of a public key, we can write a small program, right? This is actually referred to as that phrase smart contracting, that coined by Nick Szabo, actually in the early 2000s, may even have been late 90s, is how far back these ideas really go. So when you have the ability to actually lock up this money and have an encumbrance on it, or some sort of program that has to be executed, there are really incredible, complex behaviors that you can compose with this. You can think about these as little micro tools. Tools that, when used appropriately in combination with one another, can create, even though they're simple in and of themselves, they can create very complex systems and very predictable systems that don't lose anybody else's money. And this is in very different contrast to a lot of the ways that some of the other newer blockchains have approached. And I'll get to that here in a minute. So what is a transaction? It has a list of inputs, right? This is inputs in a Bitcoin transaction are references to previous payments that have been spent, right, or accumulated. It has a list of outputs, which is who now owns it, which can then be spent later. So an output becomes an input in a future transaction, right? And then we have the encumbrance, and this is that smart contract component that I'm talking about. Okay. What am I talking about when I say sound money? What is this sound money hypothesis, right? I will say that probably the biggest, most informative group of people that was helpful to my thinking about this was the Nakamoto Institute. These are some of the very earliest first generation Bitcoiners that really, before even any of this blockchain stuff kind of took off, it was the Nakamoto Institute, people who were really taking every word that Satoshi had said, thinking about it carefully and relating it to existing monetary ideas, Austrian economics, lots of different components, right? But the general idea, and this is my words, is that markets tend to converge, right, towards an efficient system. Because, it's not, if I'm, wanting to do business, I don't want to use a different currency for every different business that I transact with, right? I want something convenient. I want something useful. That's really what money is about. All the properties that a good money has, all the fungibility, divisibility, and durability, and so on, all of those properties really are in service of that social aspect that I'm talking about. So this is one of those driving forces that ultimately led to this idea called hyper-Bitcoinization. I think originally coined by Daniel Krawitz at the Nakamoto Institute. So please do go read that for more of a point. But I think that really is the reason. It's not for me that it's like one token versus another. It's not one blockchain versus another. For me, it's a movement. It's an overarching movement. We all have a very common enemy here. And it's those trusted, centralized institutions that have failed us, across the board have failed us through and through. But if we can think about this for a second, and we can have a money that isn't coupled to those centralized institutions. I mean, it seems so obvious now, in retrospect, 10 years later after the white paper, but sound money, this idea of having a independent money that nobody has the ability to manipulate or control, that is really what I see as forming the foundation for what could be one of the first truly free markets, one that is unconstrained by government restrictions and regulations. So let's talk about Bitcoin. I mean, how did we where are we? Why did we hear all of these crazy debates over the past several years? What is Bitcoin, and why is it doing things the way that it does? Really quickly, I think it's slow and steady wins the race. When you're dealing with somebody else's money and you're writing code that deals with somebody else's money, you have a moral imperative to make sure that code doesn't lose that other person's money, right? So I think slow and steady is really the only way that we can move this thing forward. Unfortunately, that means that for some people who want to take things really fast and treat it like a startup, which is typically the ideal of going fast and breaking things, yeah, I would love it to go faster. I would absolutely love it to go faster, but man, the education process is so slow. It's so difficult because these concepts are so deeply embedded, not only in our psyches, but deeply embedded in the way all of society operates right now, right? Everything is tied to that dollar. Everything is tied to that national currency. When you cross a border, you're transiting into someone else's sovereignty, right? So these are kind of implicitly political ideas that we got to take it slow. We got to make sure we get it right. So the other thing is reliability and resilience against would-be attackers. So to Bitcoin, one of the most important realizations that I had was that Bitcoin is for my enemies too, right? Like it's true. Bitcoin is something that is for everybody, and it's not useful as a money if it's restricted to any group of people, right? No money is useful. I mean, none of the stuff would be useful. So one of the other core ideas behind Bitcoin's design and how it approaches things is it kind of makes the assumption, in fact, this is the idea of what Byzantine fault tolerance is, right? You don't know if one of the servers in your network or one of the people in your network is just acting foolishly, or the server, for whatever reason, maybe it got hit by a cosmic ray and it's just not executing the code correctly, or it could very well be an attacker, right? That uncertainty of whether or not it's a fault, like just because of a computer fault, or somebody making a bad decision, or if it's an actual attacker, that is what we call Byzantine. Right? That is the definition of the Byzantine general's problems. We don't have a way of distinguishing against that, but we want to design a system that's resilient against both. So that kind of gets me to the third point, which I will say is a core of Bitcoin's design philosophy, which is don't trust, right? Verify, right? We have the ability, the math now, because we don't have to trust anything that somebody says. We can actually just look at the mathematical signature that is produced when an individual signs a transaction. And like we said before, a Bitcoin transaction, if I'm paying someone, for example, I'm going to pay for one of these books out here, that's a contract. I have committed this payment to you, and I'm signing that contract. It's a very simple smart contract, but it can be composed at much higher orders if we just follow this basic principle. Don't trust on the word, trust on the signature, trust in the math. Always verify. So how do we contrast it? And I don't want to pick on anybody in particular here because I think everybody is making a good faith effort to design a system which serves the wider needs. There are differing technical opinions about the architectural design decisions that are made in these things. But since Ethereum does happen to be one of the very first and primary competitors to Bitcoin at this point, it's really easy. And a lot of the other chains have started to copy Ethereum. So if you start seeing like third generation blockchains, as I heard some of the names mentioned around here, a lot of them kind of follow the Ethereum model. And I think this is because what they're looking for is ease of development, right? It seems a lot easier to develop on Solidity because it's a lot more of a user-friendly programming language than Script. But that's a double-edged sword, right? If something is easy, then it's going to be really easy to also write code that has bugs in it. And as an engineer, personally, I would prefer a system that it's not possible to have a bug which loses somebody money. And we can design systems that do this. But just some contrasting points here. I know we've talked about fixed money supply already earlier today versus an unlimited money supply. You can pick your side, pick your argument. Personally, I like the idea of sound money. If I've purchased something, I want to know that the contract of me purchasing it is going to be upheld, right? When I acquired my Bitcoin, I knew that it would only ever be 21 million. So if there was ever a possibility that someone could step in and change that number, Bitcoin would be worthless to me, because that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for a money that increases in value over time, not one that somebody can arbitrarily change. And I tried to run numbers here on Ethereum. I'm really not trying to pick on them about this policy, but I think this was 2017, the inflation was 14.75%. So that's 14.75% decrease in the purchasing power of the raw currency. And that's what I'm trying to get away from in terms of the US dollar, right? Like I don't want to lose 2% of my value every year just because it's good for the country. It's like, this is if I worked for this is my work, I want to keep my work. So that's my thoughts on that. The other thing I see here is a real big difference on this proof of work versus proof of stake thing. I'm sure this has been a belabored point, but I actually think proof of work is pretty much the only chance that we have of fixing the Earth's energy problem. It will incentivize, it will actually first, it will upset any subsidized energy markets, right? Because the energy markets are going to be imbalanced. The true cost of that energy is actually much higher than what you're actually paying for it. And so those will be the environments where the energy grid starts to get challenged, first and foremost. And those will be the opportunities for new renewable energy to be brought onto the grid. And I think en masse, if we do achieve hyper-Bitcoinization, the vast majority of demand for energy will be this backstop of this underlying sound money, which is used in pretty much all financial transactions, all trade at the end of the day. So I think a vast majority of the waste that goes into, say, running the Federal Reserve, or all the armored trucks that drive around the cash, to the air conditioning of all the banks, to the 800 watts per ATM that's used, it's just an absolutely astronomical energy cost that just people don't have any idea just how big it is. And I think ultimately, just my estimate is that Bitcoin ends up being a cheaper system to run for the same degrees of security. The other thing I want to get into before we get too far is the UTXO model. So I did describe how the Bitcoin transaction works, how that little contract, that little computer program can control whether or not that money can be spent, right? Ethereum kind of took a different approach. They used something called the account-based model. And this leads to a number of different issues, not the least of which for me is a privacy concern. Whereas I can have many UTXOs that are public to the world, the more that I have, in fact, the more difficult it becomes to trace it back to me as an individual. Whereas with Ethereum, everything is they push you into having one account for all of your financial transactions. And that aggregation to me is a threat to my privacy. So I really prefer that. And that kind of gets to the last point, which is where we lead into Fabric. In Bitcoin, storage in the blockchain is expensive, right? This is a database that's going to be around for 10,000 years, probably more, right? It's probably the only system that could potentially resist an AI takeover, right? Because no matter how powerful, how smart that AI is, as long as it's not breaking the laws of physics, it can't catch up to the mining power of Bitcoin because we've accumulated that thermodynamic security 10 years in advance at this point. So even if some mysterious AI decides to come in and try to control the world economy, it's just not going to be possible because it still cannot break the laws of physics. But the space in the blockchain is expensive because it's a database that's going to be around for a long time. So how do we do this world computer stuff? How do we decentralize all of the different services that are on the internet that we have to trust someone to use today, even if it could otherwise be a peer-to-peer thing? Bitcoin takes the approach of pushing those computations up off of the blockchain and creating alternative systems where only the parties that are interested in those computations have visibility into them. And where it seems like Ethereum, I think Ethereum is making some adaptation here. The ETH 2.0 approach is changing how they do things to follow more closely the off-chain model. But up to date, all of those transactions are stored in the chain. It's that means that every individual across the entire network is running the same computations for all the peer-to-peer trades that are happening out there, right? That means it's an exponential increase in the amount of storage space that you're going to need to keep the records of those computations around. It's also, it's work that, first of all, it's a privacy violation if I'm seeing everybody else's computer code, right? So we got to think about privacy stuff and how do we do zero knowledge circuits, which is kind of what I get into. So this is just how I contrast the two ideas. Again, really not trying to pick on Ethereum. but it's as an engineer, kind of hard. So let me just tell you about my thoughts on proof of stake here. I'm not anti-proof of stake, actually. This is a common misconception. I think that proof of stake does work in some cases, but you cannot use it to create a currency at the base layer. I think Andrew Poelstra wrote a great essay about this. Please do get this link, because Andrew Poelstra's certainly among the most respected mathematicians, I would say, in the space. He's a major contributor to bullet proofs, if you guys know what that is. Anyways, he makes an argument that because the system is being secured by the same parties who are holding the wealth, that it actually creates a disincentive for the system to be secure. It creates a strong centralization pressure, which is unfortunate. But this was my gut reaction, this number one. This proof of stake, to me, seems like it rewards people who already have wealth. And that's not exactly what I'm looking for, right? Like I'm fine with people, accumulating wealth. I'm absolutely fine with savings, right? That's something I'm excited about. But proof of stake seems to give people who have more existing wealth more power in the system. What I would like to have is everybody can participate in the system by simply contributing value, right? And that's how you earn the currency. And that's where the proof of work comes from. That's why maybe I should call myself more of a proof of work maximalist then, or a monetary maximalist at the very least. But Bitcoin is really the system that implements all of these ideas the best right now, from my perspective. If another one comes along and it is better than Bitcoin in these properties, I would be happy to switch. But honestly, I haven't seen anything as of yet. Nothing that really piques my interest. It's also proof of stake is also really, really highly experimental. If we go back to that original idea behind Bitcoin, slow and steady wins the race. Most of the technologies that are in use in Bitcoin, and some of the reasons that some technologies could have been used but were not, is because they were so new. In the cryptography space, you don't want to use new cryptography because it hasn't been battle tested in the markets for, by the parties that have the computing power to break it for long periods of time. So you want to use, Bitcoin made some decisions that it used specific cryptographic primitives that were 10, 15, 20 years old, and they still didn't show any signs of having weaknesses. Okay, 20 years of accumulated history on academic peer review seems to indicate these things are secure enough to trust other people's money on it, right? So those are my thoughts on proof of stake. Now, I do think it could work at layer 2. And this means, though, that from my hypothesis, that you would be bonding Bitcoin into these proof of stake contracts. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. You look at the structure of what a corporation is, or any sort of aggregation of groups of individuals coming together. Of course you want them to be able to vote and control and decide what happens with their stake. I think proof of stake makes perfect sense at layer 2, just not layer 1. Okay, I got through this. All right, so what did we end up doing here? So Fabric, if Bitcoin's blockchain is layer 1 as a sound money, it's a base layer that you can have some very simple rules. You know exactly what these rules do. There's no unexpected behaviors. There's no Turing completeness, right? Your every contract, you can look at it, and before you sign it, you know exactly what it's going to do. Turns out you can use that to build instead of waiting around 10 minutes or an hour for every transaction. We've got Lightning at layer 2, uses these constructs to do instantaneous payments. Well, Fabric uses those instantaneous payments to perform what's called zero-knowledge contingent payments for computations. So you can write a program, compile it down to the zero-knowledge circuit in Fabric, distribute that circuit to the network, and then anybody who computes components of that circuit will be able to claim Bitcoin that you paid the network to run. So it's actually like cloud computing, except instead of trusting Amazon, You actually now have a formal proof that your contract runs in a certain way. They have no visibility into how that contract runs because we're using something called homomorphic encryption. And those people will be able to get their payments. Now, I'm running short on time, and I do want to get to some questions here as quickly as possible, but SigHash, anyone can pay. Okay? This is already possible on Bitcoin today. It's been possible since the beginning. This is how you do crowdfunding on Bitcoin. This is a way that you create one of those transactions. It doesn't have any inputs, but it has a certain amount that you're trying to raise, right? You have a certain output size that you're looking to raise. SigHash, anyone can pay, allows you to broadcast that transaction. It's not valid on the chain until enough people add their own inputs that it matches that criteria, and that gets you your crowdfunding. SigHash, no input, similar idea. This is one that allows you to sign a transaction but not provide any inputs. And this is what's really useful for composing things like atomic swaps, doing market orders by broadcasting a transaction in a similar way. We basically say that there's no inputs, but they'll be provided later. Do look this up. There's a really interesting series of controversial discussions about this. Some think it's too powerful because it basically turns Bitcoin into a full-on supercomputer. CheckSig from Stack is very similar. This allows you to actually build contracts in the Bitcoin stack and then run them as if, you know, the core Bitcoin language script supported them. So this is really powerful. Andrew Polstra also has a ton of work on this that I'm going to talk about. What did we build? Please do check this stuff out in your own time. We have built RPG, which is a virtual worlds gaming platform. So this is really taking off, I think, with people under, in the teenage space. Also Southeast Asia right now. We've already got 100,000 users, and we're using a Bitcoin bonded currency. And then what we're launching tomorrow is, we'll be doing this in Silicon Valley, Portal, which is a trustless peer-to-peer atomic swap application. And that's all I've got. Sure, yeah, please, yeah, by all means. I tried to get URLs on here just so that you guys could catch pictures. So.
The last part, can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so Portal. So Portal is a company we partnered with. They're doing a user experience focused decentralized exchange. So using the homomorphic components that I'm talking about, basically you put an order into the system, it goes out into the network. People can't see what that order is. It's like if you guys know what a dark pool is, a dark pool is like it allows for more fair pricing because it's like wrapping it in multiple layers so people can't see what the prices are. But if they have an order that matches, it executes. Right? And so the people who help that execution take place get a small payment, and then both parties also get their corresponding trades. So this is going to be announced tomorrow. There's a meetup, Silicon Valley Bitcoin meetup. If you want to go check that out, there will be a live stream. So if you want to see that live event, it'll be up there. So.
Is this based on merge mining? I didn't know what you think about merge mining.
Yeah, merge mining is an opportunity for two different chains to use the same mining resource to secure both chains. We are not using the concept of merge mining. In fact, we don't have we're not a blockchain. We're not building a blockchain. There already is a blockchain. It's the Bitcoin blockchain. Our system is a peer-to-peer network, right? So what we're doing is we're actually just passing transactions across the network. And if the people who can fill them will fill them, and they don't even need to relay them on, which grants our system a lot more efficiency than a blockchain might have. So we don't need merge mining in our aspect. But merge mining is really interesting. I think there are some incentive questions. It is possible for a merge mined sidechain, if it has its own currency, to potentially be a net negative for the main chain, because it has the potential, if it becomes valuable, to draw mining power away from it, right?
Like a parasite.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that there are 2 or 3 production side chains that are now running using merge mining, including RSK, which RSK is another great project, by the way. Rootstock allows you to run the Ethereum virtual machine, but instead of using Ether, it runs on top of Bitcoin. So you can deploy your Solidity contracts directly on top of Bitcoin today if you really want to. So.
Any more questions? Yes, to Murray.
Yeah, so my question is always, typically whenever people debate the proof of stake versus proof of work designs, like you listed out to some of your beliefs about the issues, but one of them being the very first one, it seems to reward existing wealth rather than incentivize contribution. Would you say that's actually more of an execution of how people are designing proof of stake at the moment versus proof of stake of how it can be executed?
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think it would be possible to have a proof of stake system that had some sort of degree of fair launch, but unfortunately, just the number of eyeballs that you get when you launch, it's still so small. It's hard to call it a fair launch at any degree, right? So.
But that's marketing and kind of exposure issue versus
Absolutely.
technological.
Yes, correct. That's I like to say socio-technical, right? So it's so important there.
All right, Jared at the back.
Yes, just a comment, or actually a question to you. Do you have any concerns about the perceived concentration of wealth with existing Bitcoin holders? And how do you feel about that security as it relates to a 51% tax?
Absolutely. So I gave a lot of thought about this, right? This really challenged me because I hadn't fully sussed out my political leanings yet, and it took me some time to really wrap my head around this. Yeah, I mean, when you're launching a new money, right, the early movers are going to have an advantage. And that's a good thing. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for you to spread word of mouth and get every single one of the people who are close to you involved as quickly as possible. Be that crazy uncle, you know what I'm saying? And help them ride that rocket ship, right? But, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is not scheduled to be fully deployed until 2140. So, you look at the numbers. Wealth does not typically last in history longer than 3 generations, okay? So it's just a fact, right? Like, whatever reason, like, generational wealth just eventually falls out. So I'm not worried about it. I think it's actually an opportunity not only for the people that probably need it the most to take advantage of it, but I also think that it's the people that are taking advantage of it probably have the deepest seated passions about it, and those are the people who I want to see well capitalized. You know what I'm saying? It's not the bankers, because the bankers are laughing, right? They think it's a joke. Well, most of them at least. Now the smart ones are starting to get into it, but. You see what I'm saying? Like, those are the people I want to be empowered, right? Because I want them to bring their ideas, and I want to bring them capital and apply it. So.
This might be a stupid question, but the RPG thing, did you all build that yourself from scratch? And if so, why wouldn't you want your own altcoin?
Fair enough.
Like, if you have that capacity to build that, then you can remove volatility. There's just a lot more that you can do with it. I was curious as to what your reason was for that.
Absolutely. So, my history is in entrepreneurship, and typically, as an entrepreneur, you want to find a problem that the market has, and then you want to come up with a solution to that problem. When you're launching a product of any sort, it's that you got to find that problem. But if you want to introduce the launching of a new currency to your equation, you now have a second problem, right? And my resources are already strapped enough. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it looks like Bitcoin's working pretty damn well as a currency. So I'm personally happy to accept Bitcoin deposits because I know that's going to be valuable, right? And then I hold that in our contract, right? And that we have a currency. It's like a Bitcoin-backed currency, right? So. If you want to, it's just like the old gold-backed currency used to be, but it's Bitcoin-backed. So we have that currency, and you can speculate on it if you really want to.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it boils down to the Bitcoin that it's backed by.
Understood.
So
Why is ZK swaps
Yes, ma'am.
ZK swaps are important because in order to have fair markets, properly free trade, you need to eliminate the ability for any of the facilitators to front run your orders, right? So right now, today, and there are supposed regulations that are preventing this, traditional exchanges have full visibility into all the orders that are coming in. It takes one shady dude sitting at a desk to look at that and make a little trade ahead of time. You know what I'm saying? That's the problem. So what we want is we want guaranteed privacy in our trades, so that I don't even know who the counterparty is. I don't even know. What I'm doing is I'm setting my fair price and I'm sitting it out on the market. And if somebody else thinks that's a fair price, then they execute it. And that's the Austrian argument, right? For every trade that takes place, both parties are profiting, because otherwise they wouldn't make the trade, right? Like, I'm perceiving that I'm profiting because maybe I have more apples than I have oranges, and I'm looking for some oranges. My apples are worth less to me than they're worth to you because you have oranges. See, so that is the Austrian economic argument. And so the more trades we can facilitate and in a way that we can prove that no information is leaking across that market, the closer we can get asymptotically towards a perfectly fair market. And that's what we're looking for.
Thank you. So I'm pretty sure that you hear about new currencies rising up and just coming about that may or may not catch on. And it seems like popularity of a currency that aids in standardization of a currency almost in some ways flies in the face of privacy of transaction. So that being said, I have a question. I'm just curious. Have you ever heard of OWO coin, and what's your opinion of it, if you have?
I haven't heard of it. I'm always happy to look at the technology, how these things are implemented, because that's what it boils down to me. It needs to be implemented in such a way that it is actually secure, not that it just claims to be secure, right? Because if something claims to be secure, I think that's a net negative, right? Because then you're fooling people who don't know any better into adopting it and using it as if it were secret, as if it were a private or whatever it is, right? But if it doesn't have those properties, then you're basically taking money from those people.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
I think